So the Chiefs have been using a newly signed UDFA in a unique way on offense that could actually provide enough value to earn him a spot on the 53-man roster. And in this video, I'll share who that is and why that could be, but not before I talk about Chris Jones wanting to bring back a very familiar face on the D-line, Hollywood Brown being the biggest receiving threat the team has had in years, and more. But first, how about those? All right, first up, the CEO of Sack Nation himself turned 30 years young today, and that instantly got me thinking about a question I got in last night's live stream. Somebody asked if I think it's possible that Chris Jones breaks the all-time sack record this season, since he did tweet out he was getting 20 plus this year. Well, in order to beat that record, he'd have to get 23 sacks, which is a lot, to say the least. The record is currently a two-way tie between Michael Strahan and TJ Watt. Strahan racked up 22.5 sacks all the way back in 2001, and TJ Watt matched that exact number, 22.5 sacks 20 years later, back in 2021. So, what do you guys think? Could Chris Jones beat the all-time sack record this year? If not, how many do you think he could end up getting? In his 8-year NFL career, Chris Jones has averaged about 9.4 sacks a season, with his career high being 15.5. He did this twice, actually, in 2018 as well as 2022. And that's more in line with my current thoughts, that Chris Jones finishes the season with around 15 sacks. Honestly, that would be pretty incredible, though I would not complain one bit if he stacked up even more. After all, Michael Strahan went from 9.5 sacks in 2000 all the way to 22.5 in 2001 when he was 30 years old. That just so happens to be the same age as Chris Jones, so maybe the 30-year mark is the lucky thing to factor into the equation. From here, I gotta talk about Chris Jones wanting a familiar face to return to the equation of the defensive line, as well as a unique offensive weapon that could have a fighter's chance at making the roster. But before I do, summer is in full swing, as you all know, which means it's hot, extremely humid, and I will get sunburned if I go outside to even get the mail. But this also means the NFL season is right around the corner. And this year, I definitely plan on going back to a Chiefs game at Arrowhead when it's not scorching hot, so definitely sometime later in the year, maybe after the bye. That's why I need to tell you about my special hookup from today's sponsor, SeatGeek. Everyone can use my code HBTC10 and get 10% off any tickets on SeatGeek, whether you are a new customer or not. This also applies to other sports games like the Royals, Kansas City Current, concerts, festivals, you name it. Code HBTC10 is gonna get it done. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know if you are getting a good deal. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and SeatGeek is the only site that lets you return your tickets ahead of the event with swaps. So hey, take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, and add code HBTC10 to your account ASAP, because this offer is only available for a limited time. All right, one player Chris Jones is hoping factors back into the equation of the defensive line is Frank the Shark Clark. He recently posted a story on his Instagram in response to someone who I believe is a fan asking Chris Jones to help get Frank Clark back on the team, and Chris Jones obliged. He shared this saying, "Bring the slime back." Now, I know they are close friends, and I will forever be grateful, thankful, etc. for Frank the Shark Clark, especially in the playoffs, but I think his time with the team is over, unless he wants to sign to the practice squad sometime later in the season if injuries start stacking up along the D-line. It's about the only realistic way I could see things playing out that involves the return of Frank Clark at this point in time. Last year, Frank Clark played for the Broncos and the Seahawks, getting released from both of them, totaling 0 starts, 8 tackles, and 0 sacks, pressures, or QB hits. Therefore, I think it's best to just let that ship sail. And before I end this segment on Chris Jones, talking about him reminded me about a very lazy article around the NFL put out about him last week. Basically, they took an article from the KC Star and painted it in a way that made it seem like Chris Jones was wanting to skip out on training camp again like he did the year prior during his contract holdout. And again, they painted this in a serious light when in the original interview, he was actually joking. So yeah, around the NFL put out an out-of-context article about Chris Jones. He jokingly said he asked Andy Reid to skip out on some days of training camp, and in response, Andy Reid just stared at him. Therefore, he's still awaiting to see if he can have some rest days during camp. And again, Chris Jones was just joking around, yet one of the official Around the NFL articles made this all seem serious, casting Chris Jones in a negative light. the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal, but it is lazy reporting, and you would think the NFL would do a little better than that. Next up, Hollywood Brown released some training footage today on his Instagram stories, working on his release off the line, and sheesh, it's got me ready for the regular season already, which is sadly still very far away. The addition of Hollywood Brown was definitely a great one, with Seth Kaiser weighing in about him in an interview I did with him last week, noting this is the first receiver since Tyreek Hill that can truly be a threat in all three areas of the field: shallow, intermediate, and deep down the field. MVS, at least the season before last, was a semi-reliable deep target, but that was about it. Juju Smith-Schuster, a couple seasons ago, was a great offset to Kelsey in the middle of the field, but definitely not a deep threat with his speed. And while Hollywood honestly might excel in the middle of the field this season above all else, he's got that elite 4.27 speed to be able to burn you deep as well.
Hollywood Brown, I think he's a great fit. I love his ability to win at the intermediate levels of the field in particular. He has good deep speed. His best routes are in the middle, the intermediate of the field, utilizing that speed as a threat to create space. He's really good at that, and that's where Patrick Mahomes loves to attack. But he can do both. And that's the great thing about maybe having him as their first option, is he's not limited in where on the field he can threaten.
Now, Jeremy Fowler recently reported that the Rashee Rice suspension may not happen until next season, depending on how long the legal process plays out, which is something Ian Rappaport said as well back during the draft. However, if the Rice suspension does happen this year, Seth Kaiser thinks Skyy Moore might get some of the first opportunities in the slot during the suspension, but ultimately, it's probably going to be Hollywood Brown who succeeds in that role the most.
A lot of the stuff that they have Rashee Rice do and the stuff that he was successful with last year, I don't know. So playing from the slot, I do think that's where Moore would be at his best. One thing is, with Rice, that limited role that they created for him relied on two things: his burst, so his ability to run away a little bit on crossers. Even though he doesn't have great long speed, he's got great burst. That first 5-10 yards, terrific at running away there. So he could run away on crossers, on digs, on some of those types of looks. And he also showed a really good feel for zone coverages. Here's the problem. Those are two things Skyy Moore has not shown. So he's at his best from the slot, but using an identical role, I think, would be tough for him. I do think that they'll probably rotate Worthy and Brown in the slot a fair bit more. But then who takes those perimeter snaps? And so it thins them out, because they've tried that with Moore. It hasn't worked 2 years in a row. I think they'll give Moore a shot to earn some of those slot snaps, because some of those, slants and whip routes and some of those things, he can do that. He gets good releases. I'm surprised he hasn't been a better pro. His lack of functional strength has really hurt him, I think. And when you are built like he is and you don't have elite speed or quickness, it just gives you problems out there. So I think Moore will probably get first dibs on increased snaps from the slot. But I also think, unless he shows a little more, my guess is they'll probably utilize Brown. He won from the slot a ton in Arizona. I'm guessing they'll use him primarily there, because he can run a lot of those same crossers and that sort of thing that Rice was doing. And then that means you get Worthy on the boundary more, running some of those 9 routes, clearing up the field, being the post guy in Mills and that sort of thing.
And if the Rice suspension does happen this year, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Xavier Worthy, in my opinion, to show up and show out as early as humanly possible in the season. He's been hampered during almost all of OTAs with a hamstring tweak, which is definitely unfortunate and doesn't help his progress in the offense. But again, they may need to lean on this man more than any other rookie receiver in quite some time, maybe even more than Rashee Rice. They definitely leaned on him last year, but kind of ramped up during the second half of the season. You're going to need Xavier Worthy, meanwhile, to pretty much produce potentially from the jump if the suspension happens. From here, I want to talk about the intriguing idea of how a UDFA running back makes the 53-man roster. It's something I did mention shortly after he was signed by the team, but a recent article by John Dixon of Arrowhead Pride got me thinking about this in a bit more detail. The article is simply titled, "Carson Steele Could End Up Being an Andy Reid Fullback." And before I get to why that could be and how that could be meaningful, a reminder about Steele is that he was a running back in college, going crazy at Ball State before transferring to UCLA in 2023, where he still racked up nearly 1,200 yards from scrimmage and 10 total touchdowns. Dane Brugler's draft guide ends their segment on Steele with this: "Overall, Steele won't wow with his ability to create with speed or lateral quickness, but He runs with vision and urgency and has pass-catching value. His chances of earning an NFL roster spot likely will hinge on his development in pass protection and special teams coverage. So, what if he was indeed able to lock in a spot on the 53-man roster, contributing heavily on special teams, but also used in a fullback hybrid role on offense, especially given the fact that he can also effectively catch passes out of the backfield? So if you combine that with the fact he can be used as a bulldozer of a running back, and if he can get the pass protection aspect of the offense down, earn a little bit of trust there, you never know what could happen. The Chiefs opted to forego a fullback on the roster last year, which is only the third time in Andy Reid's tenure as a head coach this has happened. However, Carson Steele noted something pretty interesting in a recent interview. Quote, "They've got me rolling in and out at running back and at fullback out there. I'm cool with whatever. I feel like I can fit in somewhere." I mean, it makes sense. Dane Brugler notes that Steele is built like a linebacker, and the author of this article, John Dixon, points out that at 6 feet tall and 228 pounds, Carson is the biggest running back among the 7 currently on the 90-man roster. Plus, he's even wearing the old number of Anthony Sherman, who played fullback for the team from 2013 to 2020. Let's be honest, the number means absolutely nothing at the end of the day, but it is intriguing to think that if Steele impresses enough during training camp and preseason, he could find himself on the roster, maybe as running back for essentially a fullback hybrid to use on teams, special teams, and in some unique ways on the offense. Use him as a lead blocker in a typical way you would use a fullback, but he's fast enough that you could use him out of the backfield as a pass catcher, and really the sky is the limit on how Andy Reid could draw plays up for him. There's also the possibility Steele is RB3, but I'm holding out a bit of hope that it ends up being a veteran like Jerick McKinnon. However, that's where training camp and preseason may bring some answers, and that's not even factoring in the Welshman Louis Rees-Zammit. I think he is going to be in a fight there for a unique role of his own on the team. But with all that being said, what do you think about the idea of Carson Steele making the roster as a fullback hybrid, bringing back a position, sort of at least, that Andy Reid kept off the roster altogether last year? Sherman was 5'10", 242 pounds. Their most recent fullback of 2022, Mike Burton, he was 6 foot, 236 pounds, and that puts Carson Steele only 8 pounds lighter than Burton while being the same height. Steele, however, shows a decent promise in the run game as well if his college game translates to the pros. So maybe, just maybe, Carson Steele could be a unique weapon for the Chiefs on offense this season, though he does have an uphill battle given the competition in that room. And being a UDFA, you can earn your spot on the roster. You just gotta really fight for it. So with all that being said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments down below. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?